This morning we're going to go into the next few sentences of the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So I'll just read out the verses. Yeah? She who is skilled in her good, who wishes to attain that state of calm, should act thus. She should be able, upright, perfectly upright, of noble speech, gentle and humble, contented, easily supported, with few duties of light livelihood, with senses calm, discreet, not impudent, not greedily attached to families. So I'm just going to go into 3 qualities that are listed in these verses, okay? And that'll be this morning's discussion. And I'm going to be quoting quite a bit from Living with Kindness, and all the quotes will be pasted on the on that, what's it called, Padlet. So you can just access them during your group, okay? And that's all in, but that'll all be in English. So picking out one of the first qualities, well, maybe no, before I go there, let me just think. Yeah, Bhante says, before attempting to develop the ideal response to others that we call metta, we need to clarify how we relate to others at a basic level, perhaps by becoming more straightforwardly ethical. Until we have done this, our ideals about metta will bear little or no relation to our ability to bring it into being in our everyday experience. So in other words, we've got an ongoing process here. We might have a vision for metta and a vision for an ideal, but we've got to start really looking at what actually happens between us and other people, what happens to us in our daily lives, and just become much more straightforward and ethical in that process. I think this is a sort of circular process. I've noticed that for myself. It's like you develop both step by step. You develop a little bit more, and then you realize that there are certain behaviors that don't align with that, and you realize how much self-interest is showing up in a different area. So then you work on that. It's a very sobering experience, but you work on that area, and then you begin to realize, oh, you've got a slightly different take on metta. You've got a different attitude to metta now. It's becoming more grounded. It's less to do with perfection and more to do with just being in relation with others, or being in relation to the world in a real way. And how self-interest and how the kind of the things that block our metta, or the things that block our free association with others, is often quite hidden and quite complex, and it's a path of self-discovery to work out all that is there for us. I said it's a sobering process. I noticed that. I've been noticing that very much recently. Living at Adhisthana with a lot of people who are, who have been in the order a lot longer than I have, and how I get reflected back, and I see my inadequacies sometimes more strongly, or I see myself speak in ways which later on I reassess or I reevaluate in the light of more metta or more clarity. One of my friends says, if you're extroverted, this process is more sobering. It's humiliating, and maybe that is for us extroverts. We learn a bit, kind of in the kind of ground, on the ground, as it were, and it's not necessarily an easy process. But this whole thing about getting to know ourselves and becoming more ethically straightforward is a process of growing integrity and growing authenticity. It's where our inner values and our inner motivations are also being expressed on the outside, mirrored by external expression. And we're up against, just turn this off. Well, we're up against a lot of ideals that we have, and also self-interest, and a quality of self-interest, habitual self-interest. Yeah. My visualization practice is Shakyamuni, and I visualize Shakyamuni, the Buddha, sitting underneath a tree, and he's dressed in the yellow ochre robes of a mendicant. And when I see those robes and I see him sitting under the tree, I think, oh, he's a monk on the outside, or is a spiritual practitioner on the outside, and he's also the same on the inside. His inner clothing and his outer clothing, his outer expression, and his inner experience are the same. This often isn't the case for us. And Bhante says, we're aiming for states of consciousness that are free from the dead weight of self-interest and recrimination. And I love this metaphor, to be free of the dead weight of self-interest. You get a sense of being burdened or dragging a weight around you, something that kind of weighs us down, this self-interest. So one of the first qualities that Bhante mentions is Sakho, able, capable. It just means something quite simple, to be able to do things, to be vigorous, to be adept. Just be very practical. On a very practical level, we're capable. Bhante says, the Buddhist approach to the spiritual life is quite practical and matter of fact. It is not saying that you need to be a sensitive soul or a spiritual person. It is simply saying you need to be capable. This sometimes can be quite challenging to our view. I think we've got this idea that some people are more spiritual than ourselves because they can meditate a bit longer, or they seem a bit smoother in life, or they've got a kindness to them, or sometimes it's just that they speak softly and you think that person must be really, really spiritual. Being an extrovert, I can easily project this onto introverts. You know, they're like this silent, reflective personality in the corner, and I think, oh, they're being really spiritual, and all I'm doing is running around talking and making a lot of noise. And I remember saying to one of my friends who was very introverted, you know, what are you thinking about? Like this, like the curiosity, you know, as if I don't know anything. What are you thinking about when you're so quiet? And she said, sometimes, Saddhanandi, nothing. This was a nice lesson for me. Okay. So we easily project spirituality onto others. And this quality of capability is a transferable life skill. We use this expression, don't we, in our work mode. What is the transferable life skill? So we can be capable in our areas of life, and that makes us capable in the spiritual life, if only we decide to turn towards that. When I was a young mitra in Glasgow, one of my friends said to me that Bhante used to say he could tell that somebody was ready to be ordained because they managed to post a letter. This is a very low level of capability, but one day I posted a letter to that person and I forgot to put a stamp on it. So I realized at that point I wasn't ready to be ordained, okay? So, it is quite a good measure, actually. I'll tell you another thing I did, which was really silly, but just to share this. As a young mitra, I used to write these really intense diaries. And one day I sent all my diaries. I was going to send all my diaries to a spiritual teacher that in this movement, an order member, that I wanted them to look at them, and I sent it to the wrong person. So anyway, this is me just expressing why I wasn't ready to be ordained and I couldn't post a letter. So I'm just telling you this. Okay. So we need to become capable. And in one of Bante's books, it might be Living Wisely, it might be that. He says that individuals develop three-dimensionally. They don't just develop in a two-dimensional way. So this is an interesting area to reflect on. Like, for instance, we might have a strong intellectual and philosophical understanding of the Dharma, and that might be an interesting line to pursue, but there's a lot of broad qualities that we also need to develop. We need to develop in a very rounded way, a broad 360-degree spiritual life that affects all of us. So for some of us, this work takes 5 to 10 years, I reckon, at the beginning. So just settle into it. Yeah? Don't fight against it. This isn't a small job that we're describing. This is something that's really worth achieving. And of course, all of these things add up to something much more practical. You become capable, but eventually you are capable in the spiritual life. And that is not a small, what's the word, accomplishment. So Bhante says, to be capable is when confronted with any given situation, difficult or otherwise, you can cope, you can manage, you can get by. I think this suggests a certain amount of resourcefulness and a certain amount of self-knowledge. We have to know to some extent what our limitations are. But we also have to know that we can go quite far into our limitations, maybe even slightly beyond our limitations, and still survive. You know, we can't always keep ourselves within our own sort of quiet comfort zone. So we need to keep stretching ourselves. And Bhante calls this mental toughness. We need to develop mental toughness. This is quite interesting because we think of the spiritual life as becoming more sensitive. So what does it mean to also develop mental toughness? I think one way that I've learnt to use this mental toughness, as I'm talking about it, is to be robust enough to see my own failings and my own imperfections in life. Often we want to try and avoid that, and if you're in a path of development, you're going to have to face it, and you're going to have to face it in relationship to others where you see mistakes that you've made, and you can't hold back just because you're frightened of being confronted with your own failings. So the spiritual life is not a glass house where only delicate flowers bloom. We can't create situations where very sensitive flowers grow up, which cannot stand any kind of weather. We need to develop ourselves as plants, and we need to become plants that can stand in all weather, in all circumstances. That's what we're developing. Of course, we do need glass houses sometimes. We need protection sometimes. Retreats are a very strong protected environment. And at the same time, we need to be able to grow strong in the conditions and environment of life. Our spiritual life needs to get tested in these universal situations, in the weather of life, as it were. When I When I was, let me think, what age was I? 33, 34. And I'd been practicing the Dharma for 10 or 11 years. And my father was given a diagnosis of terminal cancer. And I went and lived with him for on and off for about 3 months. And that's when my Dharma practice really, what we'd say in English, came of age. It was like a rite of passage. It was like my Dharma practice got tested in the death of my father. And I remember this moment when I walked from one room to another, I thought, it's all in place now. And what's in place? I think probably in that moment, what was in place was, I have practiced enough now to be able to face my father's death. And that is no small accomplishment. So my Dharma practice needed to be tested outside of Triratna in this universal context. Up until then, I'd grown, as a young woman, I'd grown up within Triratna. And that was good, and it was very encouraging, it was very supportive, and I became the woman that I became. And I needed another environment just to see if I was a plant that simply grew under glass, or whether I could withstand life. So not all of us are capable in lots of different ways. That can be to do with a very difficult childhood, a lack of encouragement, complicated psychology. There's a lot of things that can complicate this area for us. But there's still many other things that we need to do, or we can do. So do not despair. So another quality that Bhante talks about is this word uju, which is in that verse, and it means upright. The verse says upright, perfectly upright. And what it means is straight as in arrows, archery. I don't know what the words would be outside English, but when you fire an arrow and it kills an animal, it needs to be straight. It needs to, you need to be able to aim it straight. So an arrow needs to be, in Indian language, uju, straight. So we ourselves need to be straight as well. And this shows up in our dealings with other people, socially, economically, and in our daily life generally. We need to be straightforward, open, and uncomplicated, not devious. We need to be someone who doesn't avoid our responsibilities, someone who knows what we think, and we're honest in communicating it, without playing games, without hiding behind half-truths. So this is a quality which I think some people have more of a natural tendency towards, and some people don't. And I'm somebody who finds this quality a bit difficult. I am quite an ethical person, but to be really straight is not easy for me sometimes. I'm often trying to please people. I'm trying to soften the truth. I'm trying to be diplomatic. I'm also trying to be strategic, like get certain things done well, or get things my way. So I think I've also got a sensitivity in my speech, so I try and keep my speech as kind as possible. And I think, again, this complicates this area a bit. But I really admire people who can just say things straight, be really, really honest. It's a fantastic quality. I mean, sometimes it does need modifying, and if you're one of those people, you know you're somebody who needs modifying by sensitivity and kindness. And some people, they need more honesty and less concern, more straightforwardness. So Bhante says, from a spiritual point of view, we have to consider what the avoidance of confronting people or situations is really about. Freedom from fear and anxiety is a natural consequence of this willingness to be honest. So this is interesting, isn't it? Sometimes our avoidance of confronting people or situations, often we do that to keep ourselves safe. But he's also saying, if you can do that well, you will be free of fear and anxiety. So we're using the wrong sort of strategy in a way, aren't we? If we're trying to sort of only offer half-truths, we'll always stay tied to a certain level of fear and anxiety. Okay then. And then the next quality that he talks about is, or one of the other qualities he talks about is contentment. Santusaka. A very beautiful quality. When I was 27, or maybe 26, anyway, it doesn't matter. I separated from a long-standing relationship, and I've been practicing the Dharma for a few years at this point. And myself and my partner lived in the same city, and we went to the same Buddhist center. So I was often seeing that person around. And I would notice in my meditation, I had lots of stories and fantasies about the conversations we would have when we met each other. Usually based on me telling him my experience and then him falling in love with me again. That was one option. Or it could be that me just sort of talking about him and telling him what he was like, and then him accepting his failings. There were all these stories, which I'm sure you all have going on. But do send in chat, let me know if I'm the only person here that's having those stories. I began to use this phrase, stillness, simplicity, and contentment, in my meditation, which was the phrases we use in the positive precept, in the third precept. And I wasn't experiencing sexual desire, so I wasn't working with that. I was working with a lack of contentment, a lack of stillness, and a desire for complexity in my communication with this person. Yeah. So I would watch these stories and I would go and I would just say to myself, stillness. Or I'd watch my mind in meditation, I'd see the stories and I'd say contentment. Or for a few weeks. And a Dharmachari in the Buddhist center came to me and he said, what are you practicing at the moment? And I said in my very eager way, stillness, simplicity, and contentment. And he said, your body language has completely changed in the last few weeks. Yeah. So it's a fantastic, it's a fantastic teaching, this whole area of contentment. And well, the stillness, simplicity, and contentment. It's such a beautiful range. So just use this if you can. Notice where you get attracted to complexity. Notice where you're restless through discontent, and just see what you can do with that. Bhante says, the contented person knows how to find satisfaction with what they have. This isn't a small thing, is it? To know how to find satisfaction with what they have. I mean, he follows this by saying, in most circumstances. And what does this require? It requires a kind of inner peace or a brightness or a harmony within ourselves. And this is where contentment is linked to individuality. You don't need anything external to compensate for some lack within yourself. We're not unreasonably dependent on external circumstances or on the approval of others. Again, I remember being on one of my early retreats after I'd done all this work on stillness, simplicity, and contentment. And it was one of the first retreats at Taraloka, and I was standing in the queue for the toilet because there was only 3 toilets. There's many more toilets now, and there was a very experienced Dhammacharini standing in the queue with me, and she said, "Oh, hello, Rachel. How are you getting on? What are you doing?" And I described something, and then she said, "That is very good. You're becoming, you're lessening your need for approval of others." And I thought, oh, I hadn't realized I was doing that. And this is a very big area for all of us, to lessen the need for the approval of others. And this is an aspect of contentment. I think there's also near enemies of contentment, or things that look like contentment but aren't contentment. So complacency is one, which is often connected to arrogance. We think we're fine. We think we don't need to change at all. Everything's okay in ourselves. That's good. That's contented in some ways, but it also means we're sort of sitting back in a state of arrogance more than a sense of satisfaction and inner resourcefulness. I think also self-denial and passivity is another thing, another behavior that looks like contentment, where you make do with very difficult circumstances because you think you have to do that. So maybe that's an area of discussion in your groups. I think all of us do these 2 things at different times. So contentment can only come from our inner resources, from creating the appropriate conditions within our mind. What we do is when we're dissatisfied with our experience, we look in the wrong place. We look for a solution, an external solution in the world. In a way, we can be looking for the mustard seed, can't we, from Kisagotami? Where are your mustard seeds? Where do you go to look for satisfaction? So these 3 qualities that I mentioned today are all qualities which the sutta asks us to develop as a support for the practice of metta. It's very much the path of transformation, taking the practice of the Dharma into the details of our life. It takes a long time to do this. It takes a lifetime. We're building the foundations for a strong level of insight. We're building foundations for a strong sense of self-knowledge, of being able to face our inadequacies, and also to be able to face our strengths, our resources. But in the process, our vision or our ideals of metta will become authentic and not merely stuck on as a kind of social behavior. We sometimes meet people, don't we, that have got a kind of nice way of being in the world. And there's something that doesn't quite ring true in our experience of them. It doesn't make the right sound, the sound that kind of kindness should make in the world. And then you think, it doesn't go as deep as it needs to, that quality. So what we're trying to do is stitch these qualities into the fabric of our being. If you like, it's a training. We're in a mind training. It's a training that is undoing our usual habitual fabric of our mind, of our being, and stitching something different into it.